When we think about war, we usually picture soldiers, maps, and generals, but behind all of that, there's this other incredibly powerful force at work, a massive economic machine. It's a machine that can take an entire country's economy and turn it almost overnight into an engine for conflict. So today, we're going to dive into how that machine actually gets built, what it really costs, and what it takes to put everything back together when the fighting is over.
And, it all kind of starts with this one very strange question. How in the world can a company that makes something as peaceful as a sewing machine suddenly start churning out pistols? I mean, it sounds completely impossible, right? Kind of like asking a chef to build a rocket ship. But believe it or not, during World War II, this sort of thing was happening all the time.
Well, the answer is actually way simpler and, frankly, more brilliant than you might think. As somebody put it perfectly in an online discussion, if you can make a lipstick casing, you can make a bullet casing. And that just nails it, doesn't it? It gets to the core idea that so many manufacturing processes are basically the same. It's all about shaping metal with precision, it's about assembly lines. The end product looks totally different, but the skills in the machines, they're often surprisingly interchangeable. And this wasn't some fluke. During World War II, you had the entire American economy doing this incredible pivot. Ford, the car company, started cranking out Jeeps, tanks, and even B-24 bombers. General Motors alone was responsible for something like 10% of all American war material. We just saw how cosmetics companies switched to making bullet casings. And yep, the Singer Sewing Machine Company produced these super high-quality .45 pistols before the government figured out their knack for precision was even better for making incredibly complex bomb sights. It's just wild.
Okay, so that's the what. We see that it can happen. But the billion-dollar question is how. How does an entire economy, full of all these different companies competing with each other, just turn on a dime to serve one single goal? Let's get into the actual mechanics.
Yeah, it's definitely not magic. It's a system, a really powerful one, built on three key things. First, you've got top-down government direction. Then you have that natural adaptability of industry we just talked about. And finally, and this is the big one, you have a set of incredibly powerful incentives that make it really, really profitable for companies to switch over.
Now, in the modern world, this relationship has grown into something we call the military-industrial complex. You've probably heard that term before. It describes this really deep, tangled relationship between a country's military and the huge defense industry that supplies it. And this is way more than just a simple buyer-seller thing. We're talking about a powerful force with its own vested interests that can actually influence national policy.
So how do these links get so tight? Well, one of the main ways is through what's known as the revolving door. Picture this: a government official or a high-ranking general spends their career overseeing these massive multi-billion-dollar defense contracts. Then, they retire from public service and get hired for a super high-paying executive job at one of the very defense companies they used to oversee. As you can imagine, that creates some incredibly close ties between the industry and the military.
And here's the really crucial difference between then and now. The motivation has totally shifted. Back in World War II, the whole effort was driven by a sense of patriotism, a real existential threat. The goal was simple: win the war fast. But in the modern military-industrial complex, the incentives are, well, a lot more economic. You have things like cost-plus contracts, where a company's profit is just a guaranteed percentage of their total costs, which, let's be honest, is not a great way to encourage saving money. The main goal for a company isn't just to win a conflict, it's to lock in these huge, long-term, and very profitable government programs.
So, we've established there's this powerful engine that can produce all the stuff needed for war. But what is the actual price of firing up that engine? What happens to the economy of the country that becomes the battlefield?
To get a handle on that, we can look at this absolutely massive study from the Kiel Institute in Germany. These guys went back and analyzed the economic data from wars all the way back to 1870, just to calculate in very real numbers the true economic price of war.
And the main number they found is, well, it's just devastating. On average, when a war is fought on a country's own soil, its economy shrinks by 30% within 5 years. Let's be really clear here. That's not a recession. That's what economists call an economic disaster.
And as if that wasn't bad enough, it gets worse. Over that same 5-year period, prices shoot up by an average of 15%. So not only is the entire economic pie getting way, way smaller, but whatever money people do have is losing its value fast.
And this chart just puts it in stark contrast. The economic damage is intensely focused. The country where the war is actually happening, they get that catastrophic 30% drop. But the immediate impact on the rest of the world? On average, it's almost zero.
The burden, the economic catastrophe, falls almost entirely on the people living through the conflict.
But of course, that's just the initial hit. In our connected, globalized world, the economic shockwaves from a war don't just stop at the border. They ripple out, and they can affect everyone.
So that begs the question, right? What exactly happens to the neighbors? Do they get hit too? And what about a country on the complete other side of the planet? Does everyone feel the same effects?
Well, that Kiel study found that when it comes to war, geography is pretty much destiny. Countries that are near the conflict also take a big economic hit. Their output drops. And that makes sense, right? You've got trade routes getting disrupted, refugee crises, all sorts of instability. Basically, war is a terrible thing for the whole neighborhood.
But here's where it gets really strange and counterintuitive. For countries that are far away from the fighting, the economic effects can actually be a small positive. Think about it. When supply chains from the war zone get wrecked, other, more distant countries might step in to fill the gap, and they see more demand for their own stuff. It's a bizarre and pretty dark side effect of our global economy.
Okay, so eventually the fighting stops, and that is when the really, truly difficult work has to begin, the rebuilding. But putting a shattered country back together is about so much more than just pouring some concrete. It's about rebuilding the very foundation of what makes a society work.
See, the experts who study this stuff say you have to rebuild 3 different kinds of capital. Of course, there's the physical capital, the roads, the buildings, the factories that got destroyed. But just as important is human capital, so the education, the skills, and the health of the people. And then there's social capital, which is maybe the most important of all. It's the trust, the norms, the networks. It's the glue that holds a society together.
And you can see this play out in the real world. Just look at the tale of 2 countries. After Singapore's difficult split from Malaysia, they had very little physical capital, but they poured everything into their people, their human capital, and they opened up to trade. Crucially, they stayed stable. Fiji, on the other hand, was ripped apart by political instability and coups after its independence. That complete lack of social and political stability just poisoned any chance of economic growth.
A really good way to think about this is like a 3-legged stool. For a society to be stable and prosperous, you need all 3 legs to be strong: a healthy civil society, a productive commercial society, and a political society that actually works. And in our modern world, you have to rebuild all 3 of these, not just at home, but also reconnect them to the big global systems too. In the end, it all just boils down to this one fundamental truth. Without agreement, there can be no peace, and without peace, there can be no lasting prosperity. You simply cannot have a successful economic recovery without first having a stable political and social agreement. They're 2 sides of the exact same coin.
And that leaves us with one last really difficult question to chew on. We've seen the mechanics of the war economy, we've seen its horrifying cost, we even have a pretty good idea of what it takes to rebuild. So, if the economic blueprint for peace is right there, why is it still so incredibly hard for so many to follow it?